There is a moment in every corporate disaster story where you can pinpoint the exact second the entire thing started to collapse. Not the slow, quiet erosion that happens behind closed doors over months of bad decisions. Not the gradual drift that executives rationalize in boardrooms while the numbers slowly bleed out. We are talking about a single, specific, jaw-dropping moment where someone in a position of enormous power and enormous responsibility looked directly into the face of their most valuable asset and decided, consciously and deliberately, that they knew better, that they were smarter, that the rules of basic business, basic loyalty, and basic common sense simply did not apply to them. The Indiana Fever just had that moment, and the fallout is going to be felt across the entire landscape of women's professional basketball for years to come. Because this is not just a story about a draft pick people are upset about. This is not just a story about a press conference that went sideways. This is a story about a franchise that was handed the single greatest economic gift in the history of their sport, treated it like an afterthought, and is now standing in the rubble of their own arrogance, wondering why the money stopped coming. Pull up a chair. This one is going to take a while. And before we go any further, if you are a Caitlin Clark fan, if you have been following her journey from those iconic college nights all the way to the professional stage, and you believe she deserves to be protected and prioritized by her franchise, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. We cover the business of women's basketball with zero corporate spin and zero agenda, just the raw analytical truth that the mainstream media is too comfortable and too cozy with league insiders to tell you. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications. You are going to want every single update on this story as it develops. Now, let us get into it. To truly understand the scale of what the Indiana Fever front office just did, you have to go back to the world before Caitlin Clark walked through their doors. And when we say the world before Caitlin Clark, we're not speaking in vague, sentimental terms. We are talking about cold, hard, verifiable economic reality that makes what happened afterward one of the most dramatic single-player financial transformations in the history of professional sports. Not women's sports, all of professional sports. Before Caitlin Clark entered the Indiana Fever organization, the franchise was, by virtually every measurable metric, completely irrelevant. We're not saying irrelevant in a dismissive or disrespectful way toward the players who were grinding and competing every single night. We are saying irrelevant in the most clinically accurate business sense of that word. The Fever were sitting at the absolute bottom of the league standings. They were struggling with attendance numbers that would embarrass a minor league hockey team in a mid-sized market. There were reports of franchise employees practically giving away tickets just to put warm bodies in the seats and avoid the psychological catastrophe of broadcasting games to rows and rows of empty plastic chairs on national television. National television, by the way, was barely even a factor because national television networks were not particularly interested in broadcasting Indiana Fever games to a national audience that had already demonstrated with remarkable consistency that they were not watching. The merchandise situation was similarly grim. The Fever were not moving product. They were not generating the kind of secondary revenue that healthy, thriving franchises generate when their fan base is emotionally and financially invested in the brand. Nobody was wearing Indiana Fever gear to the grocery store. Nobody was buying Indiana Fever coffee mugs for their office desk. Nobody was posting Indiana Fever content on social media and driving organic viral attention to the brand. The franchise existed, it competed, it survived, but it was not thriving, and everyone in the professional basketball world knew it. And then, Caitlin Clark showed up. What happened next was not gradual. It was not the slow, organic growth that franchise rebuilds typically generate when the right pieces start coming together over multiple seasons. What happened was an overnight, seismic, total transformation of everything. And when we use the word overnight, we mean it almost literally. Clark's jersey went on sale and shattered records within hours, not days, hours. The demand was so immediate, so overwhelming, and absolutely unprecedented that the infrastructure built to handle merchandise sales was genuinely struggling to keep up with the volume. Fans were placing orders from every corner of the country, from international markets, from demographics that the WNBA had never successfully reached before, and frankly stopped believing it ever would. The ticket situation was even more dramatic.
The Indiana Fever went from giving away seats to having one of the most coveted and sought-after tickets in all of professional sports. We are not talking about a healthy increase in demand. We are talking about a complete reversal of the fundamental supply and demand equation. Games that used to echo with the hollow sound of empty arena ambiance were suddenly selling out. Then they were selling out faster. Then the demand was so massive that the league had to start making previously unthinkable logistical decisions, moving Fever games out of their home arena and into larger NBA facilities just to physically accommodate the number of people who desperately wanted to be in the building to watch one specific person play basketball. Every single arena in the league was selling out when the Fever came to town. Home games, road games, it did not matter. The economic gravity of Caitlin Clark was so powerful that it was generating revenue for franchises she was not even a member of. Opposing teams were packing their buildings because their local fan bases wanted to see Clark play, even if that meant rooting against her. That is an extraordinary and almost singular economic phenomenon in the context of professional sports. Players who drive revenue for their opponents while simultaneously elevating the entire league's financial profile are extraordinarily rare. In the modern era of professional basketball, you can count them on one hand and still have fingers left over. The television numbers were equally staggering. Games featuring Caitlin Clark were drawing viewership numbers that the WNBA had never seen in its entire history. Ratings records that had stood for years were being demolished. New records were being set and then immediately broken by the next Clark appearance. Broadcasters were scrambling to add games to their schedules. Media rights negotiations that had been proceeding at a measured, predictable pace suddenly became urgent, high-stakes conversations about the future value of a league that had just discovered it was sitting on a generational talent who could deliver audiences at a scale nobody had previously thought possible. And through it all, through every sellout and every record and every viral moment and every skyrocketing revenue figure, the Indiana Fever were the beneficiary. Their franchise valuation was climbing. Their brand recognition was expanding globally. Their media presence was exploding. Sponsors were calling. Advertisers were paying premium rates. The entire economic profile of the organization was being completely rewritten in real time, and it was being rewritten by one person. So when you try to comprehend what the Indiana Fever front office did in the spring of 2026, you have to hold all of that context in your mind simultaneously, because the magnitude of the mistake they made is directly proportional to the magnitude of the gift they were given, and the gift they were given was extraordinary. Draft night in professional sports is supposed to be a celebration. It is supposed to be the moment when a franchise announces its intentions to the world, signals its priorities, and demonstrates to its fan base that the people running the organization understand what the team needs and have the basketball intelligence and business savvy to acquire it. When a franchise gets draft night right, it builds confidence, it builds excitement. It tells the paying customers that the people they are trusting with their money and their emotional investment are competent, forward-thinking, and aligned with the goals of the fan base. The Indiana Fever did not get draft night right. With the 10th overall pick in the 2026 WNBA Draft, the Indiana Fever selected Raven Johnson out of South Carolina. And in that single moment, the franchise ignited a fan uprising that is still burning with extraordinary intensity and showing absolutely no signs of cooling down. To understand why this particular selection detonated the reaction it did, you have to understand who Raven Johnson is in the specific context of the Indiana Fever fan base. This is not a case of fans being upset about an obscure prospect they had never heard of being picked ahead of a more recognizable name. This is something considerably more layered, considerably more personal, and considerably more loaded with the kind of history that makes sports rivalries so compelling and so enduring. The story starts in 2023, the NCAA Women's Basketball Final Four. Caitlin Clark is playing for Iowa, and Raven Johnson is playing for South Carolina. The game is tight, the tension is enormous, and then, in one of those moments that sports produces occasionally, and that the internet immediately transforms into permanent cultural mythology, Caitlin Clark waves off Raven Johnson at the three-point line. Not a subtle dismissal, a deliberate, visible, unmistakable gesture, daring Johnson to contest the shot. "Come guard me, see what happens." The shot went in. The moment went viral, and Raven Johnson's name became permanently attached to Caitlin Clark's highlight reel in a way that is impossible to separate. That single moment created the architecture of a rivalry. Sports fans understand rivalry. They understand the emotional charge of two competitors who have genuinely contested against each other, who have genuine history, who represent something beyond just two athletes in the same sport. The Clark versus Johnson dynamic was real, documented, and deeply embedded in the consciousness of the fan base that had watched Clark's rise from college sensation to professional star.
But the rivalry narrative, as charged as it was, might have been manageable. Athletes who compete hard against each other sometimes end up as teammates. It happens. The NBA is full of examples. Rivalries dissolve in locker rooms. Shared goals create new bonds. If the Raven Johnson acquisition had been exclusively about basketball history, the fan reaction, while negative, might have been something the organization could have weathered. What made it catastrophic was what happened in the weeks directly preceding the draft. Raven Johnson went on a podcast, and on that podcast, she said things about Caitlin Clark's fan base that did not stay on the podcast. They spread across every corner of the internet with the kind of velocity that only truly incendiary content achieves. Johnson labeled Clark's supporters as toxic. She described them as bullies, and she went further, leveling accusations of racism at the fan community that had built the Indiana Fever into the most financially successful franchise in the history of women's professional basketball. Now, the question of whether those characterizations were accurate or fair or justified is entirely separate from the business reality we are examining here. Whether you agree with Johnson's assessment or find it completely unfair is a debate that belongs on a different channel. What we are focused on here, with the cold and unsentimental lens of corporate economics, is what it means when the player your franchise just selected with a first-round draft pick has, in the weeks before being drafted, publicly and explicitly insulted the primary consumer base of the franchise that just drafted her. Because from a strictly business perspective, what happened is almost without precedent in its level of organizational self-destruction. The Indiana Fever's revenue model in the post-Clark era is built almost entirely on the passionate, financially active fan base that Clark brought to the sport. These are the people buying the season tickets. These are the people purchasing the premium courtside packages. These are the people spending money on merchandise, on travel to road games, on the secondary ticket market when primary tickets are sold out. These are the people whose social media engagement drives the organic reach that makes the Fever one of the most talked about franchises in professional basketball. These are the economic engine of the entire organization. And the Indiana Fever just handed a first-round draft pick to a player who, weeks earlier, had gone on a public platform and told those exact people that they were toxic, bullying racists. The reaction was not subtle. It was not measured. It was not the kind of mild grumbling that organizations can dismiss as the predictable noise of fans who will ultimately come around once they see the product on the floor. It was immediate, it was intense, it was organized, and it was, from the very beginning, explicitly and deliberately financial in its targeting. These fans were not just angry, they were making a specific, calculated decision to hit the Indiana Fever where it would hurt the most. They were going after the money. If the Raven Johnson draft pick was the spark and the fan reaction was the fire starting to catch, then what head coach Stephanie White did at the post-draft press conference was pouring an entire industrial drum of accelerant directly onto the flame. There is genuinely no more charitable way to describe it. What she said,
how she said it, and most critically, what she conspicuously and almost defiantly did not say, represents one of the most spectacular failures of crisis communication in recent professional sports history. A credentialed reporter asked a straightforward question about guard rotation. How would the team manage the backcourt going forward with the addition of Johnson? It was the exact question that every nervous fan watching the press conference needed answered clearly and reassuringly. It was the moment the coaching staff had an opportunity to walk back some of the anxiety the draft pick had created, to reaffirm the franchise's commitment to its most valuable player, and to send a clear signal to the paying public that the tactical vision for the team was sound. Stephanie White did the opposite. She described veteran Ty Harris as a combo guard. She then described Caitlin Clark as a player who can operate on and off the ball. And she described the newly drafted Raven Johnson as a true point guard who thrives when she has the basketball in her hands. She then capped the entire statement by noting that having this kind of guard depth would allow shooting guard Kelsey Mitchell to rest.
Read that back slowly. Process every individual word of what the head coach of the Indiana Fever said into a live microphone at a nationally covered press conference. She described the greatest offensive playmaker in the history of the sport, a player who has redefined what a point guard can do at the professional level as someone who can play on and off the ball. She described a defensive-minded rookie who had, weeks earlier, publicly insulted the fan base as a true point guard who needs the ball in her hands. And the sum total of this tactical vision is that it creates flexibility in the rotation so that Kelsey Mitchell can get some rest. The basketball analytics dimension of this is worth spending serious time on because the mainstream coverage of this story has almost entirely ignored it in favor of focusing on the personality and political dimensions. Let us talk about what Caitlin Clark actually does when she is operating as a true point guard, because it illuminates exactly why the hint of moving her off the ball triggered such a visceral reaction from fans who actually watch the game closely and understand what they are watching. When Caitlin Clark runs the point, she generates something that coaches and analysts call gravity. It is not a metaphor. It functions like a genuine physical force on the basketball court. Opposing defensive coaches are so profoundly aware of her ability to shoot from distances that would be considered difficult even for the elite male players in the NBA that they begin their defensive planning from the moment Clark crosses half court. She gets trapped, she gets double-teamed, she gets overplayed aggressively in situations where the normal rules of defensive positioning simply do not apply. Defending teams send a second player at her from extraordinary distances, abandoning normal defensive assignments to limit her ability to even catch the ball in a position to shoot. This sounds like it creates problems for Clark. What it actually does is create open looks for everyone else on the floor. Every defender who cheats toward Clark to prevent the logo 3 is a defender who has abandoned a teammate. Every double team that sends a second body at her is a second body that is no longer guarding a Fever player, who is now standing alone somewhere on the court with an open shot. The forwards get easy paint touches. The corner shooters get uncontested threes. The entire offensive ecosystem of the Indiana Fever generates its efficiency from the defensive attention that is magnetically and irresistibly pulled toward one specific player the moment she crosses half court. When you move Clark off the ball, you eliminate that gravity. She becomes a shooter running off screens instead of the gravitational center of the offense. And when she is running off screens rather than initiating the offense, the thing that makes her uniquely, historically dangerous disappears. The defense does not have to account for her the same way. The double teams do not happen the same way. The wide-open corner threes for Kelsey Mitchell do not happen the same way. The easy paint touches for the forwards do not happen the same way. The entire system that generated the Fever's offensive success degrades when Clark is not the primary ball handler. Fans who watch the data, who track the advanced metrics, who pay attention to the Fever's offensive rating when Clark is running point versus when she is operating as a secondary ball handler, know this. They have seen the numbers, they have watched the film, they understand the mechanics of why Clark as point guard is not just a preference, but an absolute tactical necessity for this team to function at the level it needs to function at to compete for a championship. So when Stephanie White stood at that podium and, in describing her vision for the 2026 roster, implied a system where Clark might cede primary ball handling responsibilities to a rookie who had just publicly torched the fan base, the reaction was not emotional overreaction, it was educated outrage. These fans were not upset because they like Clark personally and do not want anyone else touching the ball. They were upset because they understood at a sophisticated analytical level that what the coach was describing was tactically incoherent and would actively damage the team's ability to win basketball games. And through it all, Stephanie White never said the thing that would have changed everything. She never looked into the cameras and said clearly and without qualification that Caitlin Clark is the undisputed starting point guard of the Indiana Fever, and the entire offense is built around her vision and her decision-making. 6 words. That was all it would have taken. 6 words would have defused the crisis, reassured the fan base, and allowed the organization to move forward into training camp without the financial catastrophe that is currently unfolding. The silence on that specific question was not an oversight, it was a choice, and the fans noticed.
What followed the press conference was not a Twitter argument. It was not the predictable cycle of sports fan outrage that generates noise for 48 hours and then dissolves when the next news cycle arrives. What followed was a coordinated, sustained, and remarkably disciplined economic campaign targeting the Indiana Fever's revenue streams with surgical precision. These fans understood exactly where the organization was vulnerable, and they attacked those specific pressure points with an effectiveness that has apparently genuinely alarmed the people running the franchise. To understand the full weight of what is happening, you have to understand the financial position the Indiana Fever was in just months ago. The franchise had a season ticket wait list. In professional sports, a wait list is essentially the ultimate indicator of organizational health. It means that consumer demand has exceeded available supply. It means you have more people who want to give you money than you have product to sell them. It means the franchise brand is so healthy and so desirable that people are willing to put their names on a list and wait indefinitely for the privilege of spending their money on your product. Very few professional sports franchises ever achieve waitlist status. The Indiana Fever achieved it because of Caitlin Clark. That waitlist is now, by all credible accounts, essentially frozen. Fans who were on the list and who received calls from the Fever's ticket sales department asking them to convert their waitlist position into actual season ticket purchases are saying no. Not later, not wait and see, no. Right now, under these conditions, with this draft pick and this coaching staff and this tactical vision from this front office, the answer is no. The secondary ticket market tells an equally stark story. Before the draft, Fever tickets on the secondary market were trading at significant premiums above face value. This is another indicator of organizational health, because it demonstrates that fans who want to attend games are willing to pay above market prices to do so because the demand is so strong. That premium market has, according to multiple reports from people tracking the secondary market closely, cooled dramatically. The buyers who were paying those premiums are pausing. They're waiting to see how the situation develops. And in the absence of those buyers, the secondary market prices are compressing, which sends a broader signal about the health of demand for the product. The Indiana Fever's response to all of this has been both revealing and almost darkly comedic in its desperation. The organization has been pushing out aggressive marketing emails to its customer list. They have been offering promotional packages, group discounts, and various incentive structures designed to stimulate ticket purchasing activity.
They have been producing social media content that reads to anyone paying attention to the underlying dynamics like an organization that is fully aware something has gone badly wrong and is frantically trying to manufacture the appearance of normal demand while the real demand has gone somewhere else. Think about the specific and deeply ingrained irony of that situation for a moment. The Indiana Fever front office made a first-round draft pick that alienated its core fan base. That fan base, in response, began withdrawing its financial support from the organization. The organization, in response to that withdrawal, began producing marketing content asking those same fans to come back and buy premium tickets. This is the corporate equivalent of kicking your most loyal customer in the face and then sending them a promotional email offering 10% off their next purchase. What the franchise fundamentally cannot seem to grasp is that the issue is not marketing. The issue is not that fans have forgotten the fever exists, or that the awareness campaign is insufficient, or that the promotional offer is not attractive enough. The fans know exactly where the fever are. They know exactly when the games are. They know exactly where to buy tickets. They are choosing not to. Deliberately, consciously, as a specific, targeted, financially motivated form of protest against decisions they view as a direct betrayal of the player who built the franchise they thought they were supporting. You cannot email your way out of a values conflict, and that is what this is. It is not a marketing problem. It is a values problem. And the fans are waiting to see whether the organization's values align with theirs, or whether the people running the Indiana Fever are going to continue operating as though the financial ecosystem that Clark created is somehow separate from the specific decisions being made about Clark's role, Clark's teammates, and Clark's tactical utilization. There is a specific and deeply ingrained pathology that develops in professional sports front offices, and it is responsible for catastrophic organizational failures than probably any other single factor in the business. It is the pathology of executive arrogance. The sincere and total belief that the people running the organization understand the product better than the people consuming it, and that the paying customers will ultimately comply with whatever the executives decide because their loyalty to the logo is unconditional.
This pathology is somewhat understandable in its origins. General managers and team presidents spend years, sometimes decades, building expertise in their sport. They watch film obsessively, they develop relationships with scouts and analytics departments. They attend workouts and study data and have access to information that the general public does not have. And over time, this genuine expertise can curdle into something less productive, into a kind of institutional arrogance that begins to view fan opinion not as market feedback that should inform organizational decisions, but as noise generated by emotional, irrational consumers who cannot possibly understand the complexities of roster construction and will simply fall in line once the product is on the floor. This is the mindset that appears to have governed the Indiana Fever's decision-making process in the spring of 2026. The front office, led by Amber Cox and President of Basketball Operations, Kelly Kroskoff, apparently made the decision to draft Raven Johnson with a full understanding that the pick would be controversial. The podcast comments had happened. The fan reaction to those comments was not subtle or hidden. The public's feelings about Raven Johnson in the specific context of the Indiana Fever were abundantly, unmistakably clear. And the front office picked her anyway, apparently operating under the assumption that when the season started and the basketball was being played, the fans would adapt and accept and eventually move on. What this calculation missed, with catastrophic consequences, is the fundamental nature of the consumer base that Caitlin Clark built for this franchise. The Indiana Fever's new audience is not like a traditional sports fan base. It does not function like the fan bases of established franchises with multi-generational histories and deep community roots. Dallas Cowboys fans have been Cowboys fans since childhood.
Los Angeles Lakers fans have unconditional loyalty built over decades of shared experience, of championship parades and generational memories, and the kind of emotional investment that does not dissolve because of one bad draft pick. The Caitlin Clark fan base is different in ways that are structurally and fundamentally important to understand. Many of these fans did not grow up watching the WNBA. Many of them had never watched a WNBA game before Clark was drafted. They came to the sport specifically because of her. Their loyalty is not to the Indiana Fever as an institution with history and tradition and community meaning. Their loyalty is to a specific person, and the implications of that distinction are enormous. When a Dallas Cowboys fan is angry at the front office, they are still a Dallas Cowboys fan. The logo is in their blood. They will complain loudly. They might skip a game or two. They might burn a jersey for the cameras. But they come back because the team is part of their identity in a way that is not contingent on any single personnel decision. Their connection to the brand predates and will outlast any individual player or coach or executive. When a Caitlin Clark fan perceives that the organization surrounding their player is working against her, the calculus is completely different. Their connection to the Fever is not older than their connection to Clark. Their connection to the Fever is derived from and entirely dependent on their connection to Clark. If Clark is not being prioritized, if Clark is being diminished, if Clark is being surrounded by players and coached by coaches who appear to be working against her interests, there is nothing holding those fans to the Indiana Fever logo. They will close their wallets and redirect their attention without hesitation or guilt or the complicated sense of betrayal that a lifelong fan feels when they consider walking away from their team. This is the thing the Indiana Fever front office calculated incorrectly. They built their financial projections on the assumption that the demand they were experiencing was demand for the Indiana Fever. The actual demand was demand for Caitlin Clark, and those are not the same thing. They are not interchangeable, and the fans are making that distinction as clearly and as financially as possible right now. Pull back from the immediate drama of the Fever's front office dysfunction and the fan boycott and the desperate marketing emails, because what is happening in Indianapolis right now has consequences that extend far beyond the walls of one franchise. What is happening to the Indiana Fever is the leading edge of a potential financial crisis that threatens the structural integrity of the entire WNBA's economic future. And to understand why, you have to understand what the league has staked on the promise of Caitlin Clark's sustained commercial appeal and correct tactical utilization. In 2024, the WNBA signed a media rights deal that was, by any historical standard, extraordinary. 11 years, over $2.2 billion, multiple major broadcasting partners making significant long-term financial commitments to the league based on projections about future viewership numbers and advertising revenue. This deal represented the largest media rights agreement in the history of women's professional basketball, and it represented a fundamental re-evaluation of what the WNBA was worth as a broadcast property. It changed the conversation about the league's financial future in ways that are still reverberating through the industry.
The question that anyone who understands how media rights deals work would immediately ask is why? Why did multiple major networks decide in 2024 and into 2025 that the WNBA was worth more than $2 billion over 11 years? What changed? What new information did they receive that caused them to dramatically revise upward their estimation of the league's value? The answer, if you look at the ratings data and the viewership trends and the demographic analysis and the social media engagement numbers, is not mysterious. The broadcasting networks looked at what happened to WNBA viewership when Caitlin Clark was on the court. They looked at the ratings records being shattered. They looked at the demographics being reached that the league had never successfully reached before. They looked at the advertising rates being commanded by games featuring Clark, and they decided that this was the beginning of a sustained commercial transformation.
and that getting long-term rights to broadcast that transformation was worth a very large amount of money. Put more directly, the networks paid $2 billion in substantial part because they expect to broadcast Caitlin Clark playing basketball for the next decade and generating the kind of audience numbers that justify the premium advertising rates that turn $2 billion in rights fees into a profitable investment. They did not pay $2 billion to watch Caitlin Clark operating as a secondary ball handler while a defensive-minded rookie runs the offense. They did not pay $2 billion to broadcast games to angry boycotting fans who are staying home because they feel their player has been disrespected. They paid $2 billion to broadcast the version of Caitlin Clark that shatters records and fills arenas and delivers demographics and generates the kind of cultural conversation that keeps millions of people tuned in week after week. If the Indiana Fever's front office decisions result in a degraded Caitlin Clark product, the downstream consequences do not stay local. When the product degrades, the ratings soften. When the ratings soften, the advertising rates come under pressure. When the advertising rates come under pressure, the networks that signed those rights deals start having very uncomfortable internal conversations about whether the assumptions that justified those deals are holding up. And when those conversations happen at the network level, the entire financial architecture that the WNBA has built its future expansion plans on begins to show stress fractures. This is not a hypothetical risk being invented for dramatic effect. This is the straightforward business logic of how media rights deals and advertising markets and consumer boycotts interact with each other. The Indiana Fever front office is not just playing dangerous games with their own franchise's finances. They're playing dangerous games with the financial credibility of a $2 billion promise that the entire league made to its broadcast partners. Every franchise in the WNBA has a stake in what is happening in Indianapolis right now, whether they acknowledge it publicly or not. The league office has been notably quiet about the situation. That silence is its own form of communication. When a franchise is engaged in a public controversy that threatens the league's marquee asset, the lack of visible intervention from the league office is a signal that either the league does not view its role as one of intervening in franchise personnel decisions, or the league is aware of the financial stakes and is choosing to apply pressure through channels that are not visible to the public. Either way, the silence is conspicuous and the situation is serious. Strip away all of the drama and the boycott and the desperate marketing emails and the fan fury and the basketball analytics and the billion-dollar media rights implications, and what you are left with is a question that is actually, at its core, very simple. The Indiana Fever front office created a crisis by making a draft pick that alienated their consumer base and then failed to reassure that consumer base at the first available opportunity. What do you do when you have alienated your consumer base? You acknowledge the concern, you address it directly, you provide the clarity that the paying public is demanding, and you do it quickly, because every day that passes without that clarity is another day the wound is open, another day the boycott is active, and another day the secondary market is freezing, and the wait list is stalling, and the marketing emails are going unanswered. The practical solution here is not complicated. It does not require elaborate strategic planning or expensive consulting or months of internal deliberation. It requires one person to stand in front of a microphone and say 6 words. Caitlin Clark is our point guard. Not our point guard/combo option in certain lineups. Not our primary ball handler in most situations with the flexibility to operate off the ball when the coaching staff deems it tactically appropriate. Our point guard, full stop, period. No qualifications attached, no rotation discussion appended, no subtle implication that the coaching staff reserves the right to explore alternatives. 6 words that eliminate the ambiguity that is currently feeding the crisis. 6 words that signal clearly and unambiguously to the fan base that the people running this organization understand what the organization is built around and are committed to protecting it. 6 words that give the ticket sales department something to work with when they make their calls to the wait list. 6 words that tell the secondary market that the product being sold is the product the paying public is demanding.
This is not about bowing to fan pressure in a way that undermines the authority of the coaching staff to make basketball decisions. This is about communicating clearly about a decision that should not even require external pressure to make. Caitlin Clark should be the undisputed starting point guard of the Indiana Fever because that is the basketball decision that gives this team the best chance to win basketball games. The analytics support it, the revenue history supports it, the fan base demands it. There is no competing argument that holds up under scrutiny. The only thing standing between the Indiana Fever and that 6-word statement is whatever combination of ego, stubbornness, and institutional arrogance caused them to not make it when they had the chance at the press conference. Stephanie White is a basketball coach who clearly has strong opinions about how the game should be played. That is not a character flaw. That is what a head coach is supposed to have. But there is a version of strong tactical opinions that serves the franchise and a version that damages it. And the public positioning around Caitlin Clark's role has been living in the damaging version. The adjustment required is not a philosophical capitulation. It is a recognition that the tactical system that makes this team most dangerous, most watchable, most commercially successful, and most capable of competing for a championship is the system that puts the ball in Clark's hands and builds everything around her generational vision and range. Training camp is approaching. The season opener is on the calendar. The window for getting ahead of this crisis, for providing the clarity before the cameras are rolling, and the games are being played, and the ratings are being measured, and the networks are watching, is closing. Every day without that clear statement is a day the front office is choosing the crisis over the solution. And the fans, who have demonstrated remarkable organization and financial discipline in prosecuting this boycott, are watching to see whether the people running their franchise are capable of recognizing their mistake and correcting it. The Indiana Fever situation, taken in its totality, is a genuinely unprecedented case study in the economics and politics of the modern professional sports fan base. It would be reductive and intellectually insufficient to dismiss it as simply an angry fan base throwing a tantrum over a draft pick they do not like. What is actually happening is considerably more significant than that and carries implications that extend well beyond this specific franchise and this specific moment. What we are witnessing is the first fully realized example of a new power dynamic between professional sports franchises and the kind of non-traditional fan base that a genuinely transformative athlete creates around themselves. The Indiana Fever did not build the Clark fan base through decades of community investment, through generational loyalty programs, through the accumulated weight of shared championship memories and cultural tradition. The Clark fan base arrived with Clark, fully formed, massively passionate, and loyal to a person rather than a logo. And that distinction changes everything about how the relationship between franchise and fan base functions. Traditional sports franchise thinking operates on the assumption that fan loyalty is institutional and therefore relatively durable in the face of individual bad decisions. You can make some bad draft picks, you can hire and fire some coaches, you can have some losing seasons. The core fan base, the season ticket holders and the jersey wearing and the multi-generational families who have been coming to games together for decades will weather those storms because their connection to the franchise is deeper than any individual roster decision. That assumption simply does not apply to the Clark fan base, and what the Indiana Fever are learning, painfully and expensively, is that operating a franchise built around a non-traditional fan base as though it is a traditional fan base is a catastrophic strategic error.
The rules are different. The loyalties are conditional in ways they are not for traditional franchises. The tolerance for decisions that appear to work against the interests of the specific person that fan base came to support is essentially zero. This is going to be one of the defining business lessons of the current era of professional sports. As the WNBA continues to grow, and as more transformative individual talents emerge who have the ability to create this kind of personal fan base, every franchise in the league is going to face versions of the question the Indiana Fever is currently struggling with. Do you understand what you actually have? Who actually supports you and why? And do you have the institutional humility to structure your decisions around those realities rather than operating on inherited assumptions that no longer apply? The Indiana Fever have a chance to be the franchise that answers those questions correctly and becomes a model for how to navigate this new landscape. Or they have a chance to be the cautionary tale, the name that future sports business professors invoke when teaching the lesson about what happens when an organization mistakes borrowed success for owned success. Watch this space. The answer is coming. And however it goes, WNBA Pro will be right here to tell you exactly what it means. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think the Fever front office changes course before opening night, or do they ride this sinking ship all the way down? Subscribe and hit the notification bell because this story is nowhere near finished.